She stood in the middle of the war room, one woman, surrounded by uniforms and silence. Her voice was steady, recounting names that had been erased, coordinates that had been altered, missions that never made it into the logs. A colonel barked at her to stand down. Another threatened to revoke her clearance, but she didn't stop. And then it happened. The highest-ranking general in the room stood slowly. Eyes locked on hers, then dropped to one knee, not in submission, but in respect. And suddenly, no one dared speak over her again. The storm outside the compound was unrelenting. Wind clawed at the walls. The lights flickered, but the war room held steady, fortified by decades of secrets and steel. Inside, a long metal table stretched across the command center. At its head sat generals, colonels, analysts, figures who had shaped conflicts from behind screens and unmarked documents. And near the back wall, silent, stood a woman most of them had never met, Alia Trenner, civilian contractor, data retrieval specialist, not military, not intelligence, just someone whose access codes had reached deeper than most classified satellites. She didn't belong here, not by protocol, but she was here anyway. 2 days earlier, Alia had stood in front of a narrow server array in Hangar 9, a forgotten corner of Joint Operations South. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least, not alone. But the system had flagged a corrupt migration path in the data stack, and no one else had noticed. She traced the lines of code manually, bypassing auto-clean protocols, and then froze. A folder with no creator, no date, buried between archived drone telemetry files. She clicked. Inside, a record of a failed operation from 6 years ago. Unit Red Echo. 5 operatives lost. Cause unknown. But deeper in the code, hidden behind mirrored timestamps, she found something else. Coordinates, names, civilian identifiers, and one more thing, an audio clip. Extraction denied. Let them burn. No ghosts, no questions. The voice wasn't familiar, but the tone was. Command, cold, calculated. She checked the metadata. The clearance signature was redacted, but the timestamp matched an official briefing that was supposedly unrelated. She didn't sleep that night. Alia hadn't always been a contractor. Once, she was a military daughter. Her father, Colonel Jace Trenner, had served 28 years before dying during a logistics disaster. In Central Africa, the report said engine failure, but she'd always suspected otherwise. She joined civilian analytics after college. Quiet work, pattern recognition, nothing glamorous. But she'd always been good at noticing what didn't belong. This file didn't belong. She flagged it for oversight. No reply. She flagged it again. Silence. Then her access was downgraded. 2 levels. No explanation. She knew enough not to go straight to media. Not with a file this dark. So she requested a direct ethics hearing through Command Integration Office 4. A formality most were dismissed, but not hers. 3 days later, she was flown to Echo Hall, the subterranean war facility where classified ethics review boards convened. In whispers. She arrived in silence, escorted by 2 plainclothes officers who didn't speak to her on the flight. She didn't bring anything but her credentials, a tablet, and one printout, the audio log transcript. They tried to take it. She refused, and they let her through. The war room was colder than she expected. The table in the center was surrounded by a half-moon of seats, only some filled. At the top sat General Silas Crane, known for never blinking, under pressure and never speaking more than necessary. Colonel Vega, Admiral Lorne, Director Keem, and a few others whose names weren't listed anywhere. They didn't stand when she entered. "State your concern," one of them said. She stepped forward. "Come, I found a buried log inside Hangar 9's archive node. A failed operation, Red Echo. The records say it was weather interference, but the files I recovered suggest the unit was deliberately abandoned. After a successful asset acquisition." They exchanged glances. "Your point." She met their eyes. "They were ordered to die." Murmurs. "That's a bold accusation for someone with revoked access." "I didn't lose access," she said. "You took it right after I filed my report." One of the directors leaned in. "And why do you believe this is your concern?" She took a breath. Because one of the civilians on that extraction list was a young boy named Mikhail Jadro. He was supposed to be rescued. The official report says he was never found. Silence. She stepped closer. But I found his student records from a U.S. partnered school in Kosovo. He survived, which means someone made it out. Someone the system said was never there. General Crane finally spoke. His voice was deep, even. This isn't an inquiry into old ghosts. Miss Trenner, it's a security panel. Then why invite me? You weren't invited. You filed a Code 9 request. That gives you 10 minutes to speak. Not immunity. She didn't flinch. I don't want immunity. I want accountability. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't beg. She laid the evidence out. One by one, digital inconsistencies, flagrant misclassifications, timeline conflicts. And then she played the audio. The room went silent. A colonel stood abruptly. You don't have the right to. She does. The voice was unfamiliar. They all turned. At the back of the room, General Harlan Mace, one of the few living commanders who had overseen Spectre-level units, stepped forward. He wasn't scheduled to appear, but someone had summoned him. He looked at Alia, then at the others. That voice on the recording. He said, eyes narrowing, I know it. You're saying it's one of ours? I'm saying it's sitting in this room. The mood shifted. Tension rose like heat from a sealed vault. General, someone said carefully, this is not protocol. He didn't respond. He turned back to Alia, and then slowly he went down to one knee. Not in weakness, not in surrender, in respect. She has the courage none of us showed. Nobody spoke, not because they didn't want to, but because now they had to listen. And from that moment forward, she wasn't just a contractor. She was the woman who made a general kneel, not with power, but with truth. The war room was still. General Mace remained kneeling, eyes lowered in silent defiance. Across from him, Alia Trenner stood as still as stone, fingers curled around the edge of the table. Not out of fear but resolve. It took a full minute before anyone spoke. Then, Admiral Lorne rose. This is absurd, he said coldly. One audio file, one questionable record. You want to undermine years of operations? No, Alia said calmly. I want to understand how that decision was made, and who made it. She doesn't have clearance for that line of questioning, someone muttered. Neither did the ones who died, General Mace replied. Crane stood slowly. His voice was steel. Mace, you're out of line. This isn't your tribunal. No. But I trained the man who gave that order, and I know his voice when I hear it. Are you accusing a sitting officer of treason? Mace didn't blink. I'm accusing this room of cowardice. They adjourned the session with no decision. Alia was escorted back to the holding wing, not with cuffs or force but with an atmosphere thick with unease. She had done what few dared. Speak truth to rank. In the hallway, a younger analyst fell into step beside her. Quiet, nervous. Miss Trenner, he whispered. Your Code 9 triggered an anomaly alert in the metadata stream. They flagged your packet as a containment breach. That's not standard. Who flagged it? He handed her a slip of paper, a partial name. Vect. Who's Vect? She asked. Officially, nobody. Off the record, Vect runs Signal Integrity for Operations West. They only come in when records need to disappear. Alia felt it sink in. Her report didn't just go ignored. It had been targeted for deletion. That night, she wasn't taken back to her room. She was rerouted to a quiet corridor below Command Level 3. No lights, no guards. She stood alone in front of a black door marked Logistics. But when it opened, it wasn't Logistics behind it. It was Director Ren Vect, late 50s, immaculate suit, no rank displayed. But everyone in Echo Hall knew who he was. He gestured to a chair. Miss Trenner, he said calmly. You've stirred up quite a bit of interest. She didn't sit. Why was my access flagged? We don't flag anything, he replied. We monitor inconsistencies. You mean threats? He gave a small smile. We mean errors. In the narrative, she folded her arms. The narrative being that Red Echo failed on its own. That's the narrative everyone agreed to believe. Until now. He paused. You don't strike me as reckless, so I'll speak plainly. Walk away. Forget what you found. We'll clean it properly this time, and your career will be safe, even elevated. Alia looked him dead in the eye. My father was part of Echo missions before he died. You knew him. Vex's face didn't change, but something in his posture hardened. He wasn't cleared. For Red Echo, no. But he died 3 days after logging an ethics report about data misdirection inside Vault 6. And what do you think happened to him? I think he tried to do what I'm doing, and he didn't get a hearing. Vex said nothing. Alia stepped forward. You said I'm not reckless. You're right. I'm precise. And I know this, if I walk out of here with my back turned. On next, he leaned back. Then I hope you have more than one recording. I have names. I have a backup key. And now, I have Mace. She turned and left. Back in the officer's lounge, word was spreading. Alia's appearance had unsettled the command chain. Rumors rippled. The term civilian whistle was whispered. Inside halls, but what unsettled them most was Mace's reaction. No one had ever seen the general kneel, and no one could dismiss that gesture. Shaw, a mid-ranking intelligence liaison, voiced what others were thinking. If this unravels, every mission we've ever classified under Echo Protocol becomes admissible. That includes black soil, coral strike, everything. His superior, Colonel Rayner, stared at his coffee. Then we better make sure it unravels. The right way. How? With restraint. If we shut her up now, we make a martyr. But if we discredit her, Rayner shook his head. No, not her. She's already stood longer than half of us would have. Then what? We listen. For once. The next morning, Alia was summoned to a second hearing. This one was smaller. 5 seats. No screens, just paper files. General Mace sat in the center. Beside him, Director Keem, Colonel Rayner, a civilian legal officer, and a woman Alia didn't recognize, Etta Kohler, an ethics specialist from the NATO Oversight Council. Kohler spoke first. You have 15 minutes, Miss Trenner. No questions. Just your account. Alia took a breath and told them everything. How she found the file, why she flagged it, what she found beneath the archive layer, her father's connection, the delayed erasure requests, the metadata signatures that matched, Vex's office masked behind time-staggered AI tags. And finally, she slid forward a sheet with 3 named survivors from Echo-linked ops who had since gone dark. 2 are missing. 1 is living under civilian cover in Lisbon. I confirmed his ID. Kohler studied her. You're not military. You didn't have to come forward. I did, Alia said. Because every time someone like me stays silent, someone like my father dies alone, buried by the system he served. Silence. Kohler turned to Mace. You believe her? I believed her before she opened her mouth. That evening, General Crane quietly retired. No press release, just a sealed resignation. Vex's office was locked, under audit. No one heard from him again. But a rumor began that when he left Echo Hall, it was in the back of an unmarked black car, alone. 3 weeks later, Alia received a message signed, encrypted. It contained one sentence. The mission doesn't end with truth. It begins. There, attached was a sealed file. Inside, the complete Red Echo manifest, confirmed by military seal, endorsed by General Mace. The file was real. The seal was unmistakable silver, embossed, encoded with triple authentication signatures that only a handful of people in the world could create. It contained the entire Red Echo manifest, mission details, flight logs, audio transcripts, and the unredacted names of every person involved, including one Alia hadn't expected to find. Colonel Jace Trenner, her father. Officially, he was never linked to Red Echo, but there he was, not listed as an operative or command but as an override authorizer. His name appeared next to a terminal shutdown order, submitted 19 minutes before the rescue team was recalled. She read it 3 times. Override submitted. Asset compromised. Request abort. Override denied. Access revoked. 6 hours later, her father was dead. She sat still, the file glowing faintly on her tablet in the dim light of her temporary quarters. He didn't abandon the mission. He tried to save it, and they silenced him for it. At the next classified review session, Alia didn't walk in with fire. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid the open file on the table and slid it toward the panel. General Mace leaned forward and read the line slowly, his jaw clenched. I knew he was involved, he muttered. I just didn't know he tried to stop it. Colonel Rayner exhaled and rubbed his temples. That line alone, it's enough to trigger a full audit. Kohler nodded, and the moment that audit begins, this panel is no longer internal. It becomes multinational. Mace looked up at Alia. Are you prepared for that? She didn't hesitate. I didn't come this far to stall. Alia was offered protective reassignment that evening civilian intelligence posting in Scandinavia. Quiet, well-funded, with no field risks, she declined. Instead, she requested formal liaison status with the Ethics Integration Task Force that was being formed in the wake of Echo Hall's partial exposure. A small group, just 5 staffers, rotating from various NATO offices. It wasn't a promotion. It was a post created because of her. 2 weeks later, a hearing was convened in an undisclosed Baltic facility. Present were for NATO Council observers, a civilian legal team, and 2 surviving Spectre-era operatives brought in under secure conditions. One of them was the man Alia had found in Lisbon. His name was Gavin Dorn, once known by the codename Relay. He stood before the panel, hands shaking slightly. Age had changed his face, but not his posture. He spoke with gravel in his voice. I wasn't supposed to survive, but I did, because someone inside that system left a door open. He turned to look at Alia. Your father. He delayed the lockout by 8 minutes. Long enough for one evac route to stay hot. Long enough for me to run. Alia's chest tightened. She didn't blink. He saved you? She asked. No, Dorn said. He gave me the choice. They killed him for it. Later that night, Alia walked out alone beneath a slate-gray sky. Snow fell gently over the concrete steps. Mace found her there. He stepped quietly, as always, hands in his coat pockets. Your father never told anyone what he'd done, Mace said. He knew they wouldn't protect him. He thought it was enough just to do the right thing. She nodded. He was wrong. Mace looked out toward the trees. No, he was just early. Back in Echo Hall, a different kind of movement began. New compliance units were introduced. Every operation classified under Protocol Echo was now subject to retroactive oversight. Colonel Rayner voluntarily stepped down, citing legacy burden, but not in disgrace, in responsibility. Director Keem remained on as technical advisor, but publicly endorsed the changes in a sealed memo that ended with a single line: no mission is worth more than the memory of the people we betray. The systems didn't collapse, but they began to change and vect. His name was never spoken again inside Echo Hall. His offices were repurposed. His files never resurfaced. But every officer knew what Alia Trenner had found. He had tried to erase and failed. Months later, Alia stood in front of a different room. Not a war room, a classroom. 15 analysts, junior ethics officers, and 2 former operatives sat in silence as she began her first lecture. This is not a briefing, she said. This is memory management, not data memory, human memory. Because if you can't feel what the numbers mean, you shouldn't be here. She clicked to the first slide. It showed nothing but a single word, redacted. Then the next, a picture of her father, not in uniform but smiling, sleeves rolled, showing her how to assemble a kite. She paused. He didn't leave notes. He didn't leave a mission statement. But he left me this: if you see a lie buried in numbers, don't assume someone else will speak up. She looked around the room. And if you ever find yourself standing alone in the room, speak anyway. In the back, General May stood silently, listening. He never spoke during her lectures. He just made sure they happened. And when Alia left the compound that day, the security guard at the front gate, young, new, unaware of her full story, stood up and opened the door without a word. Because in Echo Hall, respect didn't come from rank anymore. It came from what you dared to say when others told you not. 2. Echo Hall changed. Not all at once. Not in the dramatic way movies pretend systems reform. But shift by shift, report by report. The culture that once rewarded silence now began rewarding clarity. It started with a memo, 5 pages, signed by Mace Kohler and to international ethics advisors. It outlined the creation of the Echo Oversight Office, a body charged with retroactively reviewing blacklisted operations. from the past 2 decades, starting with Red Echo. But the final paragraph was different. It wasn't legal language. It was written in plain words. We recognize that many served loyally under assumptions that no longer hold. This is not a reckoning. This is a reckoning with ourselves. Our duty is not to erase mistakes but to face them with dignity. At the bottom, a single name was added by hand, in blue ink. A Trenner, not as a signature. As a citation, Alia didn't attend the ceremony. There was a private one, conducted in a small steel auditorium with 20 chairs and no media. They had offered her the spotlight, the keynote. She declined. Instead, she traveled 300 miles north to a tiny village, where her father's grave had quietly rested for 10 years. She brought no flowers, just a copy of the file, the sealed one, the original from Mace, in her pocket. She also carried the patch from Red Echo, a black circle, 3 stars, no country. She sat by the headstone as the wind moved gently through the dry trees. You didn't abandon them. She whispered, you tried, and they punished you for it. She placed the file at the base of the stone, anchored with a flat rock. And now, they know. She returned to Echo Hall without fanfare. By then, the security guards didn't check her badge anymore. They knew the shape of her story. Some saluted. Some simply nodded. She never corrected them, not out of pride. Out of shared silence, inside the new oversight office. Her title was modest, lead integration analyst. It meant she reviewed discrepancies between ethics codes and active protocols. But informally, she was known as something else, the listener, because she always did, even when others were scared to speak. Young officers would come to her with gut feelings, quiet alerts, invisible gaps, whispers they weren't sure they were even allowed to notice, and she listened. Not to punish, but to protect. Months passed, then a year. In that time, Alia rewrote 3 training modules, flagged emissions for independent review, and helped exonerate a tech operative in Warsaw whose career had nearly ended over a manipulated flight log. She never asked for credit, but one day, tucked into a sealed envelope from a redacted return address, she received a simple note. You didn't just make them listen. You made them remember what this place was built for. Inside the envelope, her father's commendation pin, the one she thought was lost with his body. The change reached beyond the compound. At a summit in Brussels, General May stood before a room of officers, diplomats, and policy architects. In the final 5 minutes of his speech, he held up a photograph, a woman standing alone before a tribunal, shoulders back, eyes forward. He didn't name her. He just said, this is what courage looks like in a world that often calls it disruption. If you're building systems that punish people like her, you're building the wrong system. On the wall of the oversight office's conference room, a quote was etched into a steel plate. The ones who speak last are sometimes the only ones who tell the truth. No name, no attribution. But everyone knew who it honored. Alia's final public act came 2 years later. She was invited to a NATO Ethics Council summit to quietly advise on integrating civilian data whistle channels into military structures. She delivered her proposal in 15 pages, bullet points, clean language, no drama. But when asked to speak off record, she gave only this: we don't need more security. We need more courage. Give good people the room to question what doesn't feel right, and trust them not because they're loud, but because they listened longer than anyone else. She left the summit alone, no media, no title badge, and she didn't return to Echo Hall. Instead, she took a quiet post overseas, enlisted, working with ethical intelligence coordination for displaced civilian units in conflict regions. She didn't need to stay visible, because the legacy wasn't in being remembered. It was in making sure others didn't have to go through what she did. A decade later, a young cadet in a military ethics class raised his hand during an obscure lecture on data trace integrity. Why do they call it the Trenner Protocol? He asked. Was she an officer? The instructor smiled softly. No, he said. She was just someone who refused to shut up, because in the end, it didn't matter how many times they told her to stop talking. What mattered was that when she finally did, the whole room stayed quiet, and one man took a knee. Not all resistance roars. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes It simply refuses to stop speaking. Alia Trenner didn't fight for glory. She didn't demand a title. She stood up when others sat down. She listened when everyone else dismissed the silence. And when they told her to stop, she made them remember why her voice mattered. This wasn't a story about one woman. It was about the power of quiet integrity, about dignity that refuses to disappear, no matter who orders it to. If her story moved you, if you believe truth deserves a place in every room, comment with the word below. Let it stand as a signal to anyone who's ever been told to be quiet, that their voice has weight. And when spoken with honor, it can shift even generals to their knees. Let me know if you'd like a subtitle-optimized version for screen pacing.